Security token gives the owners of the token a right to the underlying asset. And so you can think of it as a digital form of the underlying asset. And it's issued and traded on the blockchain, and that trading and issuance takes place with smart contracts. So that's really the idea of a security token. It's a bit different than a utility token. A utility token gives you access to services, right? Access to a database, or which is the ledger, right? The blockchain ledger, the distributed ledger. But a security token is actually, something that is an asset and has monetary value. So it's not trying to find value; it already has value. So the types of security tokens there are equity-like tokens. So these act like a share. So a share in a company. So you might think of like a share of Apple stock, and you have a digital form of that, and it can give you things like voting rights, or it gives you information of its history. Who owned it before you, maybe the price history, things like this. There are also a whole class of new security tokens, which are asset-backed tokens. And you can think of these, and we're going to be talking about these on the panel, things like property or art. These are a whole class. It could also be things like, renewable energy. So there's a lot of different types of asset-backed tokens, and it actually opens up trillions and trillions of dollars of new opportunities, which we'll be talking about. So if you look at a security token, it doesn't do an ICO. You do what's called an STO, and that's a security token offering. And it's fully compliant, which means you have KYC, AML. It's going to be issued and traded on a compliant exchange. So, as you know, most of the ICO companies, that when they issue their tokens on an exchange, they go onto an exchange that is not compliant with any government body. And there's not always KYC, AML. These security tokens, because they act like a security, which is already compliant. And so if we're talking about the US, it would be compliant with FINRA or SEC or both. And your exchange, as Gary mentioned, would be an ATS or an alternative trading system, and that also would be compliant. So usually you go through like a Reg D exemption, and then there's like a Reg A plus. Actually, we're going to be talking about many of these things. So let me just quickly get into what are the advantages of this token. Well, you can actually trade illiquid assets, and so things that typically you couldn't trade, like for example, your house before you sell it, and maybe you have no rent on it. It could be things like art that's hanging in a museum. It could be a lot of different types of property. You might remember the Petro, which was issued by the government of Venezuela. These are oil reserves. Obviously, they're illiquid. They didn't do it as a security token, but you can tokenize pretty much anything. And it gives you access to a global pool of capital. So again, think of the ICO, the markets. You get access to investors on a global basis. You can also reduce the limits. You don't have to have accredited investors necessarily. So there's less fraud because they're backed by an actual asset. So key sectors for adoption, real estate, like I've mentioned, commodities, VC funds, PE funds. They're very illiquid stocks, bonds, things like this. Companies in the ecosystem, some of them are here. We have Swarm Fund, Polymath, Securitize, Harbor. They help companies to securitize and do this in a compliant way. And then some of the key exchanges, Templum, T0, Open Finance Network, are some you may have heard of. So we just wanted to give you that quick primer on security tokens, and just differentiated from the nebulous concept that everything is on security. Security tokens are a thing, and we're going to be talking about those. Thank you.
Thank you.